Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. I hope you're all happy and healthy doing the things that you love with those that you love doing them with. This is going to be a pretty long video because there's lots to go through and there's kind of themes that I need to kind of embark on with you from the get-go so you understand where I'm going with it. Otherwise, some of the things I'm going to say, you're going to think I'm mad. But I hope you can bear with me. Before we get into it, please say hello to Boaty Malone. Well, there she is. Please also hit the like button for me on the video if you enjoyed the content. Hit the subscribe button for me if you haven't already. We're nearly at 25k. I can't wait, and I'm really so grateful for your support. Hit the notification bell and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topics. Right, basically, before we get into the transfer news, views, and clues. Okay, Bugsy. Before we get into it, I need you to kind of run with me on this vibe right now that, you're going to get links this summer that are going to be underwhelming on paper, right? The names are going to be, really? What are we doing here? Would these guys get into top 4 teams we're trying to challenge with? No. So why are we going for it? Ange wants mentality monsters. We want to go for the league next year. All of these things are true and relevant. However, you also have to bake in that 2 seasons out of the Champions League has had a massive dent on our revenue. Adding a few more Beyonce concerts whilst making a bit of a difference doesn't make up the difference. And so, we have to kind of just set yourself up if you want to. If you want to, expect Tottenham to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions and then end up being disappointed, if that's the way you'd rather go about your expectations, then fine. But for me personally, I expect us to have reasonably kind of smaller than normal net spend. 120 million is what I expect net, and then whatever comes in from the outgoings. And as I've said before, generally speaking, when we're trying to sell our deadwood, we're trying to sell them to people to teams that are interested in those players. They fish in a certain size pond, and that pond is limited in its cash reserves because of the way that European football's financial pyramid structure just happens to operate. It's not our fault, but world-class players attract world-class money, but second-tier class players like we have do not necessarily attract the money that we think we can get. So it's not always as easy. As we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, it's very difficult to sell players we don't want for reasonable money into Europe. That said, so far this summer, I've been really pleasantly surprised that teams like Bayern Munich and others who you would put in the kind of the big fish, the big pond teams, are actually looking at players like Emerson Royal, and the rumours are that there's more than 1 or 2 teams that are willing to pay 29 million euros for him. I'll believe it when I see it, but if it happens, fantastic, right? It adds to the money, and the same goes for Hojbjerg. There's teams that are looking at him and are willing to pay respectable money. Not sure what will happen with the rest. We hear today that Sessegnon's going to be released, which will, I think, shave 60 grand a week off of our wage bill, which is nice, I guess, and I wish him well with his health because, man, the guy's had more bad luck with that than I think anybody I've ever seen. But anyway, it won't be Tottenham's problem any longer. Guys, I'm going to go through the transfer news, views, and clues. But what I want you to kind of keep in mind here when I said around, I might be making some kind of crazy suggestions or things that you'll disagree with, is how I've been talking all week about Ange's prioritization of mentality, right? That's the number 1 thing for him. I won't repeat the same thing over and over again, but essentially it's more important than ever. And if you want to create a winning team, you have to have certain priorities in your mind. And for him, identifying players that fit what he wants is not just about the technical ability. It's more about whether he believes in the person's belief in themselves and whether they will go the full gamut with him in conviction. Even when it's not going our way, even when we're losing, do we still continue? Do we still fight? Do we still never give up our beliefs? All of those things are massively important to him. Well, and whilst I'm massively on board with that, I love that stuff. For me personally, I love it. You have to also compare and contrast that to Tottenham's general transfer policy, which is Daniel Levy and the club would rather buy younger players who have sell-on value and who, you might be able to, you're paying for potential, not for perfection. And so you're going to get some wrong, but hopefully you buy a couple of players that you get right, that are young, that's value just explodes. And then despite you being able to amortize the player down across the contract on your books from an accounting perspective in terms of an asset, it continues to hold its value or in fact grows. A perfect example would be Destiny Udogie, Pape Sarr and Micky Van De Ven. We took risks on those three players, paid decent money for Van De Ven. For the other two, we paid peanuts essentially, and all three of those have ballooned, right? So Tottenham are going to continue on that philosophy. Some we will get wrong, some we will get right. The problem is, the challenge is that when you are looking for players that you are trying to judge their mentality, which is an intangible, which Ange obviously trusts himself when he has the phone call with the player before the signing happens. He asks certain questions, tries to understand what's important to the player, and tries to figure out whether or not this guy has the mentality that's right for him. And that's all he can do, right? And he's still going to get some of those things wrong because some people are kind of bullshit artists. Some people are good salesmen. Some people, say things but don't end up necessarily delivering. That's just life. That's human nature. But the problem is that when the transfer policy of the club is we don't go for 29, 30-year-olds, we go for 21, 22-year-olds generally, then there's less of a sample size of evidence within that player's profile to know how they handle strife, how they handle struggles, how they handle, big defeats, how they handle big game moments, how they handle arguments, injuries, whatever. All of those things are difficult to know until you've experienced them. And so, talk is cheap sometimes. And so whilst I'm 100% on board with Ange's, I buy into the mentality, it's all about mentality, he has to do that and trust in the players when he has these conversations with players that haven't necessarily been able to demonstrate all of those things that they would likely say on a conversation in their actual historical football so far, if that makes sense. I'm sure I'm rambling a little bit, but that's why the point I'm trying to make is, right, there's risk, there's added risk, and there's also added risk when it comes to buying players that might look good on paper, whose stats might look wonderful, who may be available at a price that Tottenham think is viable, but who are doing the things they're doing in systems that do not look or feel or play or shape like anything like Ange ball. And that, again, is a risk that we are going to have to incorporate in our transfer strategy this year. And there's a bunch of players that we're linked with, and one of them today is an example, I'm going to talk about him now, where on paper the stats suggest good player, great player, could fit, could do what we want, but there's the risk that you don't know, the unknown unknowns, which are how does he handle the transition to Ange ball, because what he currently plays is nothing like it. Evanilson is the guy. Porto striker, Brazilian player, 24 years old. This season, 27 games in the league, 13 goals and 4 assists, but overall 41 games, 24 goals, 6 assists, so 30 GA in 40. Sounds brilliant. If you watch him, he's a very, very good player. Two-footed, likes to drive with the ball, likes to be a sort of fox in the box, and he's been very impressive at all levels in Portugal and in Europe. A very, very, very good player. He's got a €100 million release clause, but we can ignore that because that's just what Portuguese teams do as a way to say, if you like our player, take the bid seriously. But in reality, transfer market value him about 30 million. And there's strong links with Tottenham to him. To me, the question mark isn't really about the player's capability. It's about the viability of the transition, the unknown. Just like I'm talking about young players, how can you know if they have the mentality? Whereas older players that have proven their ability to come back strong from adversity and all those sorts of things, you have more evidence so you can believe in the mentality. With the young players, you have to sort of trust your gut. With this guy, for me, his stats look great. On paper, he looks great. But the team is set up in a way to suit him, and it doesn't translate for me to Tottenham. He's very, very good in the air. He's brilliant in the air. His ability to time his jumps is sensational. His knockdowns to his teammates is phenomenal. His reading of the game is brilliant. I really, really like this player. but the whole team is set up to play to that sort of strength. They have wingers that are brilliant crossers of the ball. Do we? Perisic is gone. He was the best crosser. He's gone. Solomon was a good crosser in the sample size we saw, but he's gone. All of Brennan Johnson's assists, all of his crosses that are successful are low-driven balls for tap-ins for Richalison. When you see him float the ball in from the wide, they're no good. Sonny's not the best crosser of the ball. Sorry to say it, he really isn't. I mean, and Kulusevski does the same thing every time, cuts back in, and it's blocked most of the time. So, you know, to go after a player like Evanilson, whose stats look superb and the player looks fantastic, you either need to rebuild all of Tottenham's kind of wingers to fit that mould of player, or you have to assume that he's going to adjust to a different style of play. And again, it's just another unknown that I therefore don't think makes sense. There's too many unknowns, too many assumptions, and the risk doesn't translate for me. That being said, I do really like the player, but it's just one of those, it's like saying, you know, I'm taking the dog for a walk, it's muddy, what's the better fit? My Louis Vuittons or a pair of wellies? For me, at the moment, I would say Evanilson is a Louis Vuitton on a muddy day. If that makes sense. Doesn't make sense for me. Opposite way round, the next link for you is Callum Hudson-Odoi. Paul O'Keefe has spoken about us looking at him. On paper, I'm sure you're thinking, what? Ex-Chelsea flop, gone to Nottingham Forest, less than 5 million, once valued at 30 million, went to Nottingham Forest for cheap. Come on. Is he really going to get into any top 4 team? Is he really going to take us forward? Is he really the guy? This is so underwhelming. I can hear you think all of these things. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I initially thought. And when you look at his stats, and I'll throw it on the screen, just generally, if you look at his stats generally, you're going to see loads of red bars, loads of like 25th percentile, 50th percentile, 60th percentile, kind of meh, an average player. For what it's worth, in a Nottingham Forest team this year, I think he's done very well. He hasn't had any injuries this season, although his injury history is pretty significant, a lot of ankle injuries, so one to consider. 9 goals and an assist, I think, for Nottingham Forest in a team that just barely survived. But is he a player that you're going to be excited about? Probably not. However, let me pitch it in a different way for you. Tottenham are going to sell Bryan Hill, probably, hopefully. Tottenham are looking likely to sell Manor Solomon as well. If Callum Hudson-Odoi is a target that we're looking at, because we have a decent relationship with Forest have got financial problems, that's Daniel Levy's leverage thing. He's, you know, leopards don't change their spots, so don't expect him to not look in that direction. If we don't bring Timo Werner in permanently, then can Callum Hudson-Odoi do the squad rotation thing for a lot less money, for a lot less wages, and be of value? And I would say again, is he the pair of wellies for the muddy walk when you need it? I think he is, because if you zoom in on the specific data sets of what we're really looking for in a left winger to improve what we don't already have, which is a better take-on specialist, someone who's more likely to take players on, someone who does it with more success as a percentage of take-ons, someone who's not afraid to have a shot on goal, someone who, when they do shoot, they get it on target and gets goals out the end of it, as well as crossing the ball in a variety of different ways and makes that percentage hit numbers that are worth taking notice of. On all of those metrics, Callum Hudson-Odoi is in the top 90 percentile. Or more. Some of them is in the top 95th, 98th percentile. So he might be a bang average player at compared to other attacking midfielders and wingers in the top 5 leagues at things that are relatively unimportant to what we're looking for. But for the specificities of what we're looking for in a left winger, in what we currently don't have, and for him only coming in as being one of the guys that would be a rotation, not our first choice, I think it makes more sense than a lot of people would say it does on paper. People will hear the name, hear the history and think, you know, well, this is just typical Tottenham. But as long as it's not our first choice, and as long as it would be a replacement for Bryan Hill, Solomon and Timo Werner, And as long as someone else comes in who is our first choice and who can do all of the things that we need at far higher frequency and consistency and conviction and conversion, then I'm up for it. The last thing I'll say about Callum Hudson-Odoi is from what I've heard from the last, I forget his name, the last Nottingham Forest manager. He said that the guy's personality is incredible. His belief in himself is insane. And that, to me, goes back to maybe one of the reasons why he might just have a call with Ange, and Ange might just say, I don't mind that one. Let me know your thoughts. Guys, quickly, last couple of stories. So I've already been going for 15 minutes. Jarrad Branthwaite is back on the link list today, coming out from a couple of the decent aggregators, and they're saying that Tottenham are seriously looking at him. As I've mentioned before, 777 partners, their financial crises at across all of their situation is going to affect Everton. MSP Capital are potentially coming back in now with a chance to once again invest to try and save Everton. But as I said previously, there's already a third-party investor who previously rejected MSP Capital because of the valuation that would have diluted their holding. So it's incredibly complex what's happening at Everton. But in any event, it looks like Branthwaite might have to be sold. And as I said on yesterday's video, I think there's an argument to say, rather than going and getting a kind of mediocre left back to play back up to Udogie for when Udogie's injuries happen or when he's tired, and I think, as I say, his frame reminds me of Reece James. I do think that there will be injuries for Destiny Udogie. I don't mind the idea of Micky Van De Ven playing left back at times and bringing in someone like Jarrad Branthwaite who can play at left back, and then despite whatever happens regarding specific injuries on that left side of defence, you have top tier class players that can come in that have got all of the potential to become the very best and take Tottenham to the next level. I would rather see that than see us going and buying deliberately second tier players that are obviously just rotation. For me, I think it makes a lot of sense, but I know to some of you, it probably wouldn't. But that's just my idea. But Branthwaite back linked with Tottenham, and Everton's problems continue. So we'll see how that one develops. And the last story of the day, guys, God, this is a long one, is my favourite striker that's available. I've been talking about this kid since he was at Salzburg. And I could not believe it when Salzburg turned down the £50 million bid from Manchester United and instead accepted a £25 million bid from Leipzig, who are their Red Bull ownership, multi-club ownership partners. For me, it was the biggest demonstration ever of why this idea that there's no conflicts of interest and that multi-club ownership can be allowed to continue in the format that it is nonsense. But in any event, Benjamin Sesko has a £55 million, I think it's a €61 million release fee. He's 20 years old. Guys, this guy for me has absolutely, I love him. I love his pace. He's 6'4". He's so light with it, but physically strong. He can move and pivot like he's a middleweight boxer. Or not even that, a welterweight boxer. He's nimble, he's two-footed, his vision, his IQ. For me, this guy is going to be one of the best strikers in the world in a couple of years' time. Arsenal are looking at him. Tottenham are looking at him. Obviously, Tottenham are also looking at Santiago Jimenez. You know I'm a big fan of Santiago Jimenez. I know a lot. I read all your comments. I know a lot of you guys who are from Holland who watch Santiago Jimenez have kind of gone off him a little bit and are a little bit concerned or don't share the same faith. And I understand his second half of his season hasn't been quite as good. I still see a player in Jimenez that is that I think will be and could easily be a brilliant signing for Tottenham. However, given the choice between him and Sesko, it's Sesko all day. And if Tottenham want to spend £55 million to get that release clause triggered, do it now. If you can. If we've got the money available, that guy, for me, he is the next, I just said it, he is the next big thing. He is brilliant. I can't find a weakness in his game when I watch him. His movement, his timing, his left foot, his right foot. I don't know which foot he is because I've seen him score crackers with both sides. I love Benjamin Sesko. I would hate it if he went to Arsenal. I would love it if he came to Tottenham. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Callum Hudson-Odoi, Evanilson, Branthwaite, Sesko. Those are the stories of the day. I love you. Sorry for the long one. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, bye-bye. Bye-bye.